What if you could take the stress out of money, wealth, and estate planning? Good morning. My name is Angelina Carleton. I'm the hostess of the Design Your Legacy podcast. And this morning, I have the pleasure to introduce you to James Woodall. He is the founder of Woodall Wealth Management. In dealing with the effects of his grandfather's passing and seeing the impact of estate planning going awry, he earned his certified financial planner certification, the CFP designation, through the Southern Methodist University. He's worked with family offices with 50 million under management to be able to understand both the operational as well as investment perspective. He graduated from Texas Tech with a degree in international economics and finance. Welcome, James.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate you.
It's a pleasure to have you here, and I look forward to talking with you. So let's start with that moment that your grandfather passed away. I think this was a pivotal moment for you.
Yeah, absolutely. It was pretty interesting. So my grandfather passed away when I was in seventh grade. And I remember he passed, and he grew up in Hot Springs, Arkansas, so a town of 3 people. But when we went there, I remember that we were driving along in the procession and seeing everyone kind of take their hats off as we drove through. I thought that was really kind of cool, especially if you're growing up in Houston. People tend to see processions in the way, and they would just drive around them. So that was kind of cool. So when I think of the legacy you leave, that was one of the first memories I have, is that day in Hot Springs, Arkansas, along with, I think we went to Shoney's about 5 or 6 times that week. So if I ever see a Shoney's again, I'm going to pass by it.
Oh, okay. Wonderful. And so other than that day, tell me what happened regarding afterwards with the estate planning going awry.
Yeah, so when my grandpa passed, he was remarried recently, and he had a handful of properties that he owned, as well as I think he had a fairly sizable estate. I'm just going to assume. From there, when he passed on his deathbed, my step grandma, I guess you could say, was having paperwork be signed. There wasn't a lot of planning going on during that time. So when he passed, my step grandma inherited the assets, and then when she passed about 10 or so years later, that's where everything kind of went awry, because there were so many changes, so many things that happened that we weren't aware of.
Tell me what were some of those?
Yeah, so one of them was, the one that really stands out to me the most, is we found assets in a bank in every state. I remember that was something that was a little weird. So there was like a Bank of Hawaii, and I was still young at this time, but I remember like a Bank of Hawaii my dad was talking about. I was like, what are you talking about? Grandma's never been there. And so it took about a decade to go through the entire estate, find everything, argue with the executors over it, who of course charge the higher percentage fee that they're allowed to do, to basically find everything. And it caused such a headache between my dad and his brothers. One of his brothers, they're older, lived maybe 10 minutes away from us, and I hadn't talked to him since her passing.
Okay.
So definitely, fractured part of the family.
It's interesting. A lot of the times when it comes to money and wealth and the next generations, parents, grandparents, those who were the wealth generators will play what I call like hide the ball, and they don't want to
Yes.
talk about it. So then what ends up happening is, how does the next generation, number one, even deal with it? Because if they haven't had the training or the guidance around it, now all of a sudden you get like not just one bowling ball, you get like 10.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's a big thing for me. So even my parents, I was telling them, like, we're not going to play hide the ball. Like, we're not doing that. Like, we need to build a plan, need to know where everything's at, because that's going to affect how I kind of do my life and my planning. And
Right.
then,
So we
of
have to
course,
have the conversations.
we have to have the conversations, and they don't have to be hard. They can be fun. You can have fun having these conversations.
Yeah. So there you are. And it's almost like an Easter egg hunt, in the sense of, well, where are the rest of the accounts? What else is the executor or executrix hiding?
Exactly. Where is it at? Is there cash? Is there not cash? Those soft objects. For example, my grandfather had because he's in Pearl Harbor, and he had a hat that he wore that meant a lot to him during that. And it's like, where's that? And my dad really wanted that. So what do you do with those little things? And how do you have those discussions? How does my grandfather know that that was important to my dad? Because they didn't really talk about the war. We'd ask him, hey, how was Pearl Harbor? He would
Okay.
never tell us. He just said it was bad. That was all he would say. So how would he know my dad wanted that hat? So
Or that
again,
it would have been
conversation.
meaningful to him.
Exactly. And we still
Yeah.
have it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. My great grandfather, Herbert Carleton, was a successful insurance broker during the Great Depression, had multiple houses and multiple cars, et cetera, et cetera. And I never got a letter from him. But I think a part of it is that he didn't know to write the letter, and probably similar to your grandfather,
Mhm.
he didn't know of like, I just accumulated this nest egg, and where's the, if he could have just even set aside a weekend or 1 year or something to say, these were my experiences, to bridge that divide. Because again, like we were talking in our preamble before I pressed the record
Mhm.
button, there's so much that we don't know. And in life, you kind of just get thrown into it.
Exactly. And for example, like I know we can share this before. They're like, so I'm half Canadian. My mom was born in Montreal,
Okay.
and same thing kind of happened to her. I believe it was her grandfather was like the lead economist of the Royal Bank of Canada. At least
Yep.
that's how I remember it. So that's how I tell it. And he had 4 sailboats on the lake, like
Okay.
copy 1, 2, 3, 4. And my mom loved those. Um,
Mm,
and it was kind of cool. And she was showing me pictures of this great lake house. And then when my grandmother inherited the assets, because there was no estate plan and no education,
okay.
she went through that money quickly, like in the 70s. And then I'll never forget my mom said, you boys will never have the experience. Talking about my brother and I, boys will never have the experience of riding 4 sailboats named after your grandfather like I did. And I was like, oh, that hurt. That hurt right in the feels right there. So I was like, okay, we got to come up with a way to make that happen again.
Yeah. So how did your grandfather make his money?
So my grandfather, my father's side, he he grew up on a dirt floor in Arkansas and lived that way until World War II.
Okay.
From there, he worked through insurance. I
Okay.
think it was like Travelers is what I remember. It may have been a different name at the time. And then he just loved doing rental property. So he was real big on buying rental properties in the neighborhood that they lived in, and just over time accumulated a large number of them. So that was
Yeah.
kind of this thing. And he was always take care of the tenants, get the houses rented. Don't try to pull one over on someone because it's going to come back to haunt you. So just do the right thing, and that's kind of how he accumulated it, which is boring, simple real estate investments.
Yeah. It's almost a school of hard knocks in some
Oh,
ways.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
He must have realized something then when he was in World War II, that he didn't want to just get a job.
Yeah. And I wish I knew because he was so much older. I was so much younger. I didn't really have to have all the conversations with him. But he was definitely a fan of hard work and getting
Okay.
it done. And then discipline for sure. I remember as a kid, he would make me have to go out and like get a switch in the backyard. And for some reason, I remember that he said like, "Hey, that one's not big enough. Go get another one."
Okay.
So if you're at grandpa and grandma's house, you behaved.
Yeah, how interesting. But I guess what I'm trying to share, it's like sometimes when I look back at like my days at Penn State, if that $70,000 or $80,000 of tuition could have been invested, this is back like in the year like 1998, right? Like
Mhm.
late 90s. Okay. If it could have been invested to like 7 or 8 different houses, single family residences in Pennsylvania, how much of a different experience that would have been. But I think that a lot of times in the American dream, there's this idea of like you go to school and you collect those degrees, and yet here your grandfather was willing to choose another route.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny you say that. So I remember my grandparents would always give me like a savings bond for Christmas. It's always really cool. I mean, that's what they did. That's how they supported the war effort. And so that's what they thought that's what you do. And I remember thinking, I was like, man, if you guys spent, and you know what I'm going to know now, especially because I use a lot of mutual funds and ETFs at times, is it's like, man, you guys put that like in a mutual fund or like a 529 account, like college would have been paid for, when in fact those bonds paid for, a handful of textbooks. And I remember I had a tiny scholarship paid for literally my one calculus textbook, and that was it. So it's just, if we know what we knew now, what would we do different? So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Money is such a tool. And I know one of the intentions we set is to have the stress be taken out of money. So just tell me one more time, how old were you when your grandfather passed?
7th grade. So what is that? 13,
Thir-
14,
13,
14, something like that. I
something.
remember this is probably an overshare, but why not? I remember I was in sex ed during that, and then I had to leave, and I went, okay, good. This is really awkward.
Okay.
So I'm kind of glad I missed that class because the coach was up there, and I was like, oh, this is awkward. I'm gonna leave.
Well, I think it's real. And I think one of the things you're pointing to is it probably made an impression on your life at age 13 or 14, because you're looking out at the world and you're asking yourself these questions of, there's this whole other reality out there, and I don't know anything about it.
It did. Because I remember, I think it was like, I don't know, we'll say ninth grade. I think it was junior achievement or so came in, and we did stock trading. And I remember like, because I'm extremely competitive and I was like, and fascinated by it, I went, I got to win this. And I lost terribly, but I thought that was really interesting to do. And that's, now that we're even talking about that, yeah, that definitely was a foundational point.
Yeah. The other thing I was thinking about is, I wonder if this was then the start of your mission statement for your firm today?
Absolutely. That's why I started. That is, I don't want people to have to deal with what I dealt with as a family, even as a kid, and my
Okay.
father and my mom had to deal with.
Okay.
I don't want people to have to deal with that again, because I've seen what happens. Money's really weird. It's a tool. It's nothing more, nothing less. I love when you said that. It's just that some people see it a little differently, and it changes. It makes people get a little weird. They can be your best friends, they could be your brother, your sister, but when money comes into play, and sometimes a substantial amount, it can make very direct and dramatic changes in families.
Yes, yes. So let me ask you kind of a personal question. I'll move on
Yeah.
then to the number two on the list. So what was it like then? Was it like a huge burden on your parents? Was it like a second part-time job that they found themselves in? Or what was it like? Did it change the conversations at the dinner table?
Yeah, it was both. I remember my dad and mom. So my mom was she's like one of the first private banking folks for Chase before their company was bought out. So she was kind of used to that. Um, and just the burden that they had to deal with, the constant. Remember, my uncle lived just down the road and wouldn't answer phone calls, wouldn't answer the door if we came by, asking like, "Hey, what's going on?" And it became kind of all-consuming for at least the first 3 or 4 years. I remember that, and then over time, it was, we're looking for this now. We had to get a lawyer for this. We had to get another lawyer because our lawyer retired, and it went on for a decade, and it was stressful. I mean, it was a full-time
Yeah.
job, even to the point now where we're now past that, but I haven't seen my uncle. I literally don't know what he looks like. Said it or not,
Wow.
I haven't seen him in that long. So that's why it's kind of a very personal thing for me that people don't deal with this ever again.
Yeah. So before I move on to the second question, it's really interesting because with money, entitlement comes up.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm owed that, James. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's one that, that's always another sore subject too. It's like, oh, I'm old. I should have more of it. Why? Uh,
Right. Seniority. I'm the smarter brother, right?
yep.
Fill in the blank for all of it. Okay. So
Huh,
that's kind of the backstory. Thank you for sharing that, by the way, because
absolutely.
everybody has a story of what motivates them to have the passion to do the work that they do today. And
Mhm.
so I know that when it is personal, it's like you've walked a mile in those shoes. Yes, and that's a lot of times what I say, like even in my coaching practice, to be a great coach or consultant or advisor, it's almost like, and this is the metaphor that I use, it's like you're a Boy Scout or a Girl Scout leader and you're walking your client through the woods to the canoe by the lake, and you have to be able to tell them, watch out for that poison ivy, don't step on the rocks over there, there's a snake underneath, there, and the squirrel, like there's all those life experiences where you now know the nuances, but if you hadn't lived through it, and I think it's very age independent because like you said, you're 13 and you're introduced to this brand new experience, and somebody could be 58 or 68 and they've never even come across that reality.
Exactly. That's why it's so fascinating. That's honestly why I love doing these podcasts, and that there's so many out there now and they're so good,
Okay.
because you hear from these people and you hear their stories and you go, oh, I heard that, because we're people, right? That's how we
Yeah, yeah,
learn.
yeah.
And it's like, oh, I heard the story. Okay, I saw what they did. I'm going to avoid that by doing X, Y, Z.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's why I'm a huge fan of it, and love
Of
doing
sharing
it.
knowledge and
Yes.
yeah. Okay. So how do you plan for generations? And as I mentioned, I hope to bring out a little of your sense of humor because estate planning can be a little dull and dry.
It can be so Joel's dry sometimes. I My ideal way to do it, and this is always a fun way. I've only done it once, but I've kind of done it candidly with some friends, is having a big dinner. So we talked about, big steaks. So I like making obnoxious steaks. Like, I mean, I go to the butcher and I'm like, hey, like this is gonna be a little weird, where I'll make like a 3 or 4 pound like tomahawk steak, and I'll spend sometimes like 3 hours cooking it. It takes forever.
That's a
But
Texan right there. Keep going.
oh, absolutely. Oh yeah. And I mean, I'm going full Texan too. Like there's times I'll be wearing like cowboy boots and jean shorts or something like that, but having a good time. And
to say, let's talk about money.
Exactly. And that's kind of where it comes out. So I learned this from John Favreau, of all people. There's a great book called Tools of Titans. I recommend it to everybody. I learned this in his book, where what he does with his cast is he goes, everyone comes together and cooks. And yeah, you've got a chef kind of, but what it does is it levels everyone out from a cultural point of view or a status point of view. It doesn't matter. Like, your job is to chop the garlic. Like, I don't care who you are, Warren Buffett, like, chop the garlic, get it done right. And that's what you want to do, right?
Okay.
So that's kind of how I like to have those family conversations. Is a big family. And then we could start having a discussion like, hey, what do you think about this? And just asking questions. And like, what are the
Okay.
gaps? What do you think? And that's really, I think, where it starts.
In that casual
Because
type of setting.
absolutely. And
Okay.
that's my personality. I
Okay.
prefer to be more informal than formal in that
Okay.
spectrum.
So people can let their
Um,
guards down and
exactly. It's all about honesty, right? And it's
yeah.
how do we kind of create that environment for people to be honest and relaxed and not worry about the pressures. And you find some amazing things that happen. For example, one family, I remember the daughter, they were nervous that the daughter didn't know what she was doing. They were like, oh, we're not sure what we're doing for her. But the son, he's got it down. He has a finance degree. It was a complete 180. The son wanted nothing to do with it. He goes, I'm going to screw up. I don't know what I want to do. And the daughter's like, I'm reading textbooks on financial planning. Like, I want to know this in and out. And so it became kind of a conversation like, well, let's shift. Maybe let's see, while they got to work as a team, maybe she could have more say, or maybe that final call or something about there. So that's the way I think to start having those conversations with the family. And preferably, I say, let's do it around Christmas or Thanksgiving. So I'm secretly a fat kid.
Okay.
So if I can find an excuse to eat, that's the way to do it. Oh yeah, like Thanksgiving, it's eating all day.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
eat till it hurts and I fall
Okay.
asleep watching the Cowboys lose a football game.
Okay.
And that's how I do it. Yeah, like, have a good time. The family's there together, eat and just have a conversation. And then if no one's comfortable with it, bring an outside source. So I really think that's when you really kind of show your worth as an advisor, as a consultant, or a coach, is you're there facilitating those conversations. And it can be fun. It doesn't have to be stressful. So that's kind of how I do it. And I start the conversations, and I really don't have a plan outside of that. I just want to see where it
Oh,
goes.
okay.
And in my head, I just as an advisor too, in my head, I have like a matrix of ideas, right?
Okay.
Like, where do we want to go? Where do I think we will go? But I don't know enough until I start asking questions. Um,
Yeah, got it. So you
yeah,
create the space of safety, casualness, and just being able to get real, and then allow the people with their talents, the family members, to come forward with their interests and what they have to say.
exactly. And find the why.
Yeah.
Ask why 5 times. Um,
Oh, that's very good. Yeah.
yeah, like,
Because you have to
why?
excavate. Yeah. Because
Yep.
it's so, that's interesting. I'm so glad you said that. That's like a tweetable moment right there, because
Mhm.
people will tell you their initial answer. But then when you go 4 layers more, then like the truth starts to really come out.
Exactly. And you find some commonalities. So there's some universal truths. People want to get to a point where raising their level of living
Okay.
isn't, they're like, cool, I don't need a new car. What else can I do? What more should I do? What else? And it's a lot of times it comes back to taking care of the family, friends, and giving back to society. So that's why you see a lot of particular family offices or athletes as of late, which I think is great. A lot of foundations showing up
Okay.
because you're kind of using a purpose for that money. Like, yeah, I don't need a new car or a bigger house. I want to
Yeah.
do something cool.
Yeah.
That's why I like that.
Yeah, I want to add something to that. And it was something that I came across the other day. And I think that the insight was, when the purpose and the identity of the family is bigger than the money, it changes everything, because
Yep.
family members are going to pass away. The money and the uh, property can come and go, whether the property is personal property like a car or the 4 sailboats, etc. But if there can be a family purpose and an identity that can come forward, how much that can get people to rise above the squabbles.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So the term family office is perfect for that because it is a business. You have to run it like a business. You come up with a mission statement. What is your
Yeah.
family mission statement, and how do you figure that out? That's when you really are getting deep, and that's when you're really learning a lot about each other, and that's what makes things work.
Yeah. And it's so fascinating because family mission statements are philosophical
Mhm.
many
Yep,
times. Yeah. So it's not, it really, it touches the heart space.
exactly. And it
Yeah.
helps people kind of pitch in too. There's times where, like for now, right? Like I'm starting a business, so I don't have a lot of extra cash to be spending and throwing around at times. But it's like, hey, I want to go see my family.
Okay.
We say we want to be a group. Well, let's pitch in on vacation, or just do what I can to pitch in on vacation because at least I'm contributing and then being there. So something to
Yeah.
think about.
Yeah. Very cool. And I just want to add the thought that I think it's just so good that you create even just the environment around food, because if you're at a boardroom table at the attorney's office,
Oh God.
it's a completely different
Oh,
vibe, right?
very
Yeah.
different dynamic, very different setting.
It's almost like you're bringing out the humanity of them if you got them at the barbecue.
We're people. People are
Yeah.
people are people. Doesn't matter. I used to do this thing when I was working in a leadership role at a different firm. Was uh, they did this research on bonus payouts, and they found that if you're doing anything more complex than swinging a hammer, bonuses actually do worse. You actually perform worse.
Oh, interesting.
Fascinating, right? And this was funded by the Federal Reserve of all
Okay.
people,
Okay.
and they tested all throughout the world. And what they found was the three things people need to survive and thrive is autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So we were talking earlier about that.
Oh,
You have the purpose as a family, you
okay.
master it by whatever that is. How do you keep mastering it? And then no one's really telling you what to do,
Okay.
but you have the other two, so you can figure it out. You're smart. And with the invention of the internet, the information's there
Yeah. And then they own it.
and they own it. And it's theirs.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I know about like the coaching consulting sphere is if we come up with it, it's like great conversation. If they come up with it, they own it.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah.
theirs.
Yeah.
And run with it. My job is to, I hate this term, but be the wind in your sails,
Yeah.
right? Like
Well,
push you
to
from
create that,
behind.
yeah, that space, I call it the space of the Grand Canyon of
Oh,
just
I like that.
support and yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Hmm.
So in your focus on family stewards and family businesses, what would you say are some of the blind spots that get overlooked, like elephants in the room?
Ooh. Um, those are interesting. I've seen a few. A lot of it's kind of the, sometimes families will see that they equate money to love.
Oh,
That's always an interesting one. That's one I've seen once or twice.
that's a podcast episode all in itself.
It
Keep going.
it really is. There's a lot to that to unpack. Um, that's one I've seen a lot. Another one is
And that's so personal.
it really is. It's a tough one. It's a tough one, but again, create that environment.
Okay.
Um, another blind spot I've seen is I'm trying to think of something that I'm trying to come up with. I can't really give too much information out. One is definitely an education piece, like we talked about earlier, where kid or parents think their kids are going to be well off or it'd be okay.
Okay.
Or another one is a
Well,
big
let
blind
me if I
spot.
let me
Yeah,
just intrude for a second. So when you say
good.
education, is it that they have to get a degree from a certain school? Is it that they have to have that they have to have formal education compared to, let's say, traveling around the world for 3 years and a worldly education, or what?
Yes, that's a good way. Yeah, I've seen that.
Okay.
Yes, that's actually a really good example. Is and to kind of expound on that is putting once you've passed away. I don't know how to say it, your dad.
Okay.
Don't control your family beyond the grave. That's a big
That's what
blind
those
spot I've
legal
seen.
documents are for, when until the children
Exactly.
rebel, the adult children. Yeah, the offspring.
Exactly. And if you make it to the point where you're like, I want my kids to go to Harvard and you need to go to Harvard and go to Harvard Law and this, and they don't want to be a lawyer and they're miserable. Well, what are you
Yeah.
doing? You're making your family miserable by kind of dangling a carrot in front of them. So I think that's also a big blind spot too, is once you've passed away, have the estate plan based on the values, which I know we're going to talk about in a bit, on what you want to go for. Don't make it a rule book that you can do this because this is what made me successful. You could be a totally different person, and it's parenting when it comes down to it. It's know your kids.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what's interesting and what you're pointing to is if that image of success becomes more important than nurturing the child for who they are, or who they need to be, now you've got this clash.
Yeah, and is that natural? It just happens, right? Like if we're teenagers, like as a teenager, I was the first to admit it. You're naturally meant to rebel against your parents. That's just a
Yeah.
natural indication of life. And then that tests your parents' parenting to see, hey, how do I get better and learn more patience for those times down the road? Just how our culture set up.
Yeah. Well, I find it interesting. So let's say James wants to be a painter when he grows up, but I want James to go to Harvard Law because he needs to manage the business.
Mhm.
Yeah. So it's interesting because on multiple dimensions, it's, well, if James just becomes a painter, how will that make me look in society? And that also,
Yeah.
I'm going to add, that's kind of another blind spot in the room of how much there's like this third element of, well, we need to look good.
Yes, looks are depending on where you are, that can be a big part of it, as well as you saying that too on the family business. That's also another blind spot.
Okay.
Um, I see that quite a bit. Whereas, how does the family business? What's the succession plan for that? Sometimes it's, oh, the kids are going to take over, or sometimes the kids have no interest in this at all, but they feel a guilt of having to take that over,
Right.
and they got to change their lives and their goals. So that's also a really big one, is business succession planning.
Okay.
Depending on the business, the type, there's multiple ways it can be solved for, but that's what I've seen come up a little bit recently. I have a mentor of mine who his kids have no interest in his business at all. They're like, I just, not for me. And I've been asking, like, hey, what is your succession plan? Like, what do you want to do? Like, what's that going to look like?
Yeah. It's interesting. A lot of times people don't want to think about this unless they have to think about this. Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard to think about. We're people, right? We go from A to Z in the life. I do it. I'm the first to admit it. But we don't think about the rest of the alphabet as we go through there, and how do we solve for those steps? And it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the things that helps is if there can be trusted individuals around to bounce
Mhm.
ideas off of. So it's not like just you sitting underneath the picnic bench, underneath the tree, going, how do I write this plan? Well, I don't
Yeah.
know. I'm just going to put some stuff down. I think some other people did this and this worked, compared to like expanding the conversation, bringing in some other voices. And yeah, so that
Exactly.
it could be fun for everyone. But
Yeah, exactly. Because the truth, because you're ultimately trying to find the truth, right? That's what you're doing for. And if you look at it, the truth is not. I heard this from Jocko Willink. I'm a huge fan of him. He's a big, scary guy.
is that an athlete?
So he's a Navy SEAL
Oh, okay. Okay.
who's like 125% testosterone.
Okay.
Fascinating guy to listen to. Fascinating, just love him to death. But he talks about the truth, and he goes, "The truth is, if I'm here and you're over there, well, that's what the truth is. But if we got a circle of people around it talking about it, you can see different points of view and really see what the truth really is." So I've always liked that. So I think that's a good way of looking at it too when it comes to succession planning.
Yeah. What was his name one more time?
Jocko Willink.
I'll have to look it up.
Yeah, yeah, look him up. You'll see him, and he's a pretty intimidating guy, but I really like what he says. He's got
Yeah.
some great books out there.
Cool. I'm sure he's down to earth and yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
he's not too far from you, I think, at times. Since he's a
Okay.
SEAL, I think he's out in LA and San Diego quite a bit.
Okay. I'll call him up.
There you go. There you go. Do
Um,
it for me.
yeah. Cool. So tell me about family finance meetings, because I think a lot of times this idea of setting aside time, of course, it's brilliant, but then when I look at the statistics of those that actually do it, it's not enough. So tell me, what happens in those? And this is just to take the fear away and the mystery away, and also to shine a light on the benefits.
Exactly. They're tough. I mean, I struggle with them too. Like my dad's a great example. He's like, oh, I don't want to hear about it. Just do it, whatever. I don't care. Um, they're tough. So when I think of a family finance meeting, it's the similar concept of having everyone around. Like, what do you want? But now we're going to dig in a little bit to the numbers and the why, and potentially teach behaviors. So and we're having a family finance meeting, and it's, hey, here's where we're at. Here's the family's net worth. And I know some parents don't want to tell their children, and I'm of two minds. I get it, where you don't want to raise your children a certain way, but it's
It's
also, do you
already
want to
cashing
educate
the
your
commission
kids?
check in their minds. Go ahead.
Exactly. That's exactly what they're doing. And so it's a balance. I'll be the first to say it's not easy, but how do you have these conversations? So what I will do I say, come in, let's see where you're at. Based off of your parents' spending, we may look at this as your inheritance. Now, what do we do to get that there? Or, hey, family, if you're looking at it from all different spectrums of the economic side, hey, we have an extra $100 a month for simple math to spend on you. So here's the math and here's the numbers. And I've seen people put up charts or have, basically tip jars essentially. Here's
Okay.
how much money's left for the week, the month, the year, whatever, to do whatever you want. You can make that decision on how we're going to spend those finances because this is our fun money.
Yeah, yeah.
But how do you do that? And it's hard. It's so tough. I'll be the first to say it's tough.
Well, I think what's really beautiful about what you're sharing is that when there is that effort made, and even to have like the charts or the jars or something, it becomes visual and they can see it from
Yes.
like the bird's eye view, the eagle's view, the 5,000 foot view, whatever you call it. So it starts to become a practice. So it's not just like, okay, there's a big chunk there, between feast and famine. It is looking at how do we make decisions now,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that this becomes a muscle and a skill set that we're building and strengthening.
Absolutely. And I don't think kids are too young to start. I mean, I've heard of people doing it at 3 years old, at
Okay.
5 years old. I used to work
Okay.
at a daycare in college, and that was an experience. But when we worked there, I remember we had a lady come in and she says, you have to give kids choices. Now you can control
Mm,
those choices, but if you give them those choices, it helps them get used to making decisions throughout their
yeah.
life. And I thought that's kind of cool. And so
They're
if you do
trusting
that as a
themselves
kid,
more. Sorry.
bingo. That's exactly it. They're trusting themselves more. I remember as a kid, I like that like $20, I don't know, for my grandparents. Like, oh, this is cool. My dad's like, cool, you can go buy your own present. And I had to go Toys R Us when that was still around. And I remember having the toughest time because it was enough to get like one cool toy or like a handful of ones I didn't really like. And I remember that's a hard decision to make. And I still remember got my Wolverine Jeep. Still remember that. But I think that's a big part of it is like the decision making, right? That's the education piece that comes in those family finance meetings. On top of, um, if you're working with a professional, you can probably find gaps in the family too, like huge risk points. Some of those sometimes I haven't had to do it yet, but like a prenup agreement, like, hey, those hard conversations, right? Like, oh, like when's a good time to bring it up? How do you bring it up? Because you may have a family, like a family business where someone marries in and it's literally like, hey, this is just to protect the family, like you can't run it or whatever.
Right. Let me tell you, the other
And runs
families are
it.
looking at that outside party like,
Like, who are you, right? Like I went,
are
so
you
so
going to
last
mess
week,
this up?
yeah, it's like, you get screwed up. Like, who are you? Like, what do you know? So yeah, it's, the family's protected, right? Especially when you have a family business like that, they can be very protective of it, and they should be, right? You've worked hard for generations sometimes to build it up. So yeah, sometimes you have those hard conversations, and I've not had to do one yet, but I'm sure I'll have to do one day
Yeah,
when you get the lawyers involved.
I think what you're pointing the flashlight to is the dynamics. And a lot of it is invisible, unspoken. There's like
Mhm.
looks shot across the room or at the picnic table underneath the Texacoke, right? The Texacoke, yeah. Um,
Yep.
but also, I think what you're pointing the flashlight to is how much money, not only is it a tool, but it's like, money makes people more of who they already are. And so it's like, if you've got different opinions than I do, well, what if you spend it differently? Well, I don't agree, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing. So I always like to pick on my younger brother, because he's doing really well. So I'm super happy for him. And he spends every dollar he gets. And it's like, I freak out. I'm like, hey man, like save more for retirement. Um, but how do you do that? And how do you have these conversations and educate people? It's tough. It's not always easy. But then you kind of realize people's tendencies, and you realize your own. Like, you cover your blind spots. You go, oh, maybe I am, not balancing enough, or I'm saving enough for retirement or not, or I spend too much money going out or having a good time.
Yeah, and it's also interesting. I'm going to go to the next question after this.
Yeah.
The relationship people have with money, because it can represent so many things. Like, for instance, maybe your brother, it represents freedom. And so
Mhm.
I've got now the choice that I can buy whatever I want. No one's going to tell me I can't. And that's the connection point in the you talked about 5 levels deep before. It's, what is that why underneath that's driving that behavior?
Exactly. And it's, I've really tried my best with my folks and everyone I know that money's a tool, nothing more, nothing less. It's not your savior. It's just a tool to do something.
A lot of people can be their savior.
It can be. It can be. That's why I work real hard to say it's just a tool. It's just a
Yeah,
tool. Figure out what you're going to spend it on. Use some discernment. Make the right decisions and figure out where that next best dollar goes.
cool, cool. Okay, so
Yeah,
what are the key considerations of crafting a legacy?
I love this question.
Let's trade some notes. Keep going.
I love it. I love it. So crafting a legacy is always a fascinating conversation because it comes down to ultimately what are your values. So I have a chart or a sheet, and I'll send it to you, that I use for families when we're doing estate planning is what are your values?
Okay.
So it's a list of, I don't know, 100 so, common values in families. And what matters the most to you? When you go there, you need to start understanding what your values are because you may either have values that you aspire to
Okay.
or values that you already have, or both. You have one, each one to do more of that value. And then from there you go, okay, I have these values set up, and look at yourself and say, I want to add these to myself before I maybe remove values I don't want. For example, I would drink too much.
Okay.
Well, it's easier to add values that you like and manage those behaviors because your children are going to see that.
Oh, they're watching. And this is great
Always watching.
self-reflection work
Yeah, absolutely.
and
And
taking an inventory.
that's the best way to say it. Self-reflection and inventory right there. That's really what it is. And then what I do for my folks is every year, we do this process. It's not science, it's more of an art. Just here's a list of values. What you're going to find is that your top 3 to 5 are the same. Those don't change, but your 10 or the next 5 may change
Okay.
over time. And that's okay. That's just how we are people. And if you do that, you say, okay, these are my main values. Am I working hard to have my legacy have these values as well? And what are my legacy's
Yeah.
values? And you'll find there's definitely trends that match because, hey, you're the parents, kids, you're going to have some similarities. It just happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then from there, you say, okay, now is my estate plan matching my values? Does it come in and actually come together and make sense? And if it does, great. If not, start making changes because you may have send someone one direction when you really wanted your legacy to go a different direction.
That's wonderful. That's brilliant. And thank you for speaking into that because I think, again, if people don't take the time to have these conversations and be able to think through it, they just they could just, I don't know, have a estate plan where they just drop a whole lot of assets and financial benefits onto the next generations. And if there isn't some type of guidance there or handrails, it could just be it could just crush them.
Yeah, analysis by paralysis. I had
Yeah.
it's exactly what happens. Is I had a friend have that happen. So unfortunately, her father passed away out of the blue, and left her a large insurance policy, as well as a handful of inherited IRAs. And she's very young, and she just goes, "What do I do?" It was literally like the lawyer said, "Hey, come meet with us. Here's a check. Here you go. Here's a letter from your dad. Bye." And
Yeah.
she was stuck. She was frozen.
I can imagine it's like, welcome to France. And you're like, I don't know how to speak French.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. Because we don't educate people enough, on how
Yeah,
finances and works, and that's
right.
certainly a failure. But
Yeah, we don't talk about it in school. We don't talk about it with our friends because that could even be a thing of yeah, who are you gonna alienate today?
oh yeah, and I remember when I first got in this industry, I was always so scared to ask people like, "What do you make?" And now I'm just like point blank, like, well, "What's your salary?" Like,
Yeah.
because that way you can kind of like say, "What is your salary?" Cool, I can plan from there.
Hmm.
But I used to be so nervous about that, and then it's a weird thing. It's a cultural thing, right?
It's a cultural thing because are we allowed to talk about it? And if we're not, then like you had mentioned with your friend, she leaves the attorney's office and she's like, I'm an island right now with the weight of the Eiffel Tower on my shoulders.
Yeah, and then it goes, and it's where do you go? So I always use this for my folks that are starting a career. They typically will say, "Okay, I have these benefits. Hey, mom. Hey, dad. What do I do?" In her case, it was talking to her 2 sisters. What do I do? I, I don't know. What's the internet say? Bitcoin? What's that? Crypto? Okay, that looks interesting.
Go digital assets instead. I'm sorry, go
Yeah,
ahead.
it's like go everything that way. Go that way. Invest in whatever the meme stocks are this week. So
Yeah.
it's tough. So it's analysis by paralysis. Thankfully that they were smart and kind of ignored that and found themselves a professional, and it worked out.
Yeah.
But it's tough.
Yeah. It brings a new layer of decisions.
Yeah, and then that's what typically happens is once you get to a certain point of wealth, you go from I am growing, taking risks to that mental level in your head, and that can be $1, it could be $1,000,000, it could be $1 billion. Depends on who you are. You have this mental block in your head for whatever reason. We all do.
Right. Right.
I've hit that limit. Well, now I can't make a mistake. I
Oh, perfectionism is crippling. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like football. Like football coaches, if you're winning a game in
Hmm.
football in the fourth quarter, you're winning the entire game, going an aggressive play calling, and then the fourth quarter you're so far ahead, but you get very conservative. You're shooting yourself in the foot, and it happens time and time and time again.
Yeah. Well, they don't want to lose what they've got, but they also have to keep growing. And
Exactly.
that growth never stops. And in fact, the pressure's even more because, like you said, they feel like they have to live up to, like that third quarter. Wow, I've already gotten these results. I'm ahead. I'm winning. I can't lose any ground. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
The trick our
So,
minds play on us.
oh my goodness. Yeah. Well, perfectionism is a crippling thing, and you have to give some tools to help them kind of unweave that so they can get some breathing room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do they say? It's perfection is the enemy of done.
Oh, I hadn't heard of that.
It's like perfectionism is the enemy of done. I think that's my website. Go look at it. It's not perfect. That's like I just need to get it out.
Oh
Like I
my
have to tell
goodness.
myself that.
Yeah. Okay. So how does planning around even talking about a legacy help with the survival and thriving of an affluent family or a family business?
Yes, so I am pretty tenacious when it comes to this. So when I think of planning, I say it like this: the first generation, they were the ones that had the tenacity and the persistence to build that wealth. It's the role of the second generation to, with that same tenacity and persistence, educate yourself on it.
Okay.
It's everything because without that, you always hear the people lose their assets in the third generation. And it depends, but that when that happens, that's the role of the second generation. I'm sorry, I kind of going on a rant right now, but
That's
that's what I
okay.
think about. Yeah, that's what I think about is the second generation's goal to keep that going is to educate and
Okay.
continue to plan because it is a business.
Yeah.
If you're running a family business, how did it get there? What are the next steps? At this point, you're a business owner. You change your mindset a little bit,
Okay.
or maybe you've been getting groomed by your whoever was running the company before to take it over,
Okay.
or you have a situation where you have these large assets. What do you do to not blow it? So I use the term called discernment. I think
Okay.
I've read that a handful of times. I wish I remember where it came from, but essentially it's, you have these assets. Let's say you have such a substantial fortune that you kind of can't run out of money, but you can run out of life. You can run out of the will to do something.
Okay.
So start thinking very clearly in a methodical manner about what you want out of life. So we were talking earlier about autonomy, mastery, and purpose.
Mm.
What's that purpose, right? What do you want to do? So I always like to tell stories. So there's a story I heard that I really liked. There was a family in Houston. They had a handful of construction companies, did very well, and the parents sold them in their 50s for, like, let's say $150 million. Um, for their will, and what they wanted to do was they said, okay, we're gonna give our three kids $5 million each. We started out with nothing. We think 5 million is a lot of money
Mm.
to help them, and it is to help them really succeed in life and get that next leg up. Well, the kids thought, we were talking about earlier about how money is equated to love. Thought, well, you're going to give us 5 million, but there's 135 million because we're having these conversations going to a charity. I thought you loved us, and the kids are still, there, but it's always in the back of their mind, kind of chirping at them, right?
Hmm.
That, oh, there's just so much more money, that kind of thing.
That their red fire truck is bigger than my red fire truck.
Exactly. Or
Yeah.
people. It happens. It happens.
Yeah.
It happens to the best of us. It happens to the best of us. So you're like, oh man, I want a bigger red fire truck, or my fire truck's gonna have a ladder. And so that's something to think about too. But then there's another story I heard that made more sense, where it's a similar situation where the family had a plan, had a goal, they knew what they wanted to do, they had that purpose, which was the father said, hey, we have $200 million, to give to you when I pass. you have two options. Brandy, remember that parenting piece of the options is I give you it all, or you can take a smaller sum, let's say $1 million each for the 4 kids, and you get to run the foundation.
Okay.
And the kids decided to run the foundation, take less because it gave them that purpose.
Okay.
And that's what they do now. They have a great foundation, they run it. And that's kind of why if you look at things that,
It also,
where do you go? How do you not kind of mess it up?
yeah, and it also takes their mind off of the big red fire truck of James has more than I have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They have a purpose.
Yeah.
I'm not aiming listlessly, not,
Just a consumer
yes, exactly. It's like,
with
oh,
a
it's Wednesday.
swipey
Let's go
card
for
that's
it.
with a limitless, balance. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, hey, I
Yeah.
don't need to go to France today.
Yeah.
I have a purpose. I need to meet with this family. So come back to the fundamentals. Always come back to the people. And that's what works out.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is a part of the surviving and thriving is protecting what has been built. And, it's not just the idea of that person given their purpose. It's also the idea of the idea of the family business, and being able to protect that so it doesn't dissipate and disappear. Yeah.
Exactly. Keep it going. And then that's where you come into play now. Now you're in that role. How do you do it? What did you learn from your parents? What worked, what didn't work, and keep adjusting. And then I think especially when it comes to businesses, depending on how the business is set up, be very clear in your mission. Like, so for example, my business is, I have no intention of ever selling my company, but I named it Woodall Wealth Management because I want my kids to take it over. I want my family to take it over. That may change in the future, but the name's on the door because you know how it is. There's days you wake up and you're like, oh man, I don't want to go to work today, but name's on the door, you got to do it. So
The pride.
yeah,
Yeah, you
that's
got
my
skin in the game.
motivation. Yeah,
Yeah.
I got to do it. Got to do it. Don't
Yeah.
want to have a bad name.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Thank you. So
Definitely.
the last part is, since this is a legacy podcast, what would you like your legacy to be?
I thought about this a lot. There's a house that I found in Idaho that I'm obsessed with. I look at it every day. I think everyone should go look at it. The address. I have it memorized. Hopefully no one buys this. It's like 90 Cooley Spell, Hope, Idaho. This is a gorgeous house in the lake that overlooks everything. And when I think about my legacy, I want to create that environment, because that's my definition. That's one of my values as leadership, is create an environment for others to succeed. And so that, plus being outdoors, which I don't do enough. Clearly, you can see, super pasty guy. That's the Canadian in me. But that's my goal, as my legacy, is to create an environment where everyone can go to the house. Family can come together, enjoy it, be outside, enjoy nature, enjoy the really great parts of the country that we truly have.
Yeah.
Go there. And then the way I wanted to do it is create a cute perk trust, one of my favorite trusts to call. It's fun to say, where the house is in the trust, and then it's running through the investments that pays for it. But to be able to use the house as a family, the rule is you got to pay a portion of your income. A small portion, just a fraction of it. Yeah, tribute. Keep it running. Have some skin in the game, because you're going to care more about that house as I pass, because you get some skin in the game. And then that's the mission, right? Just keep it going. The family can always go up there. It's a family lake house that people get to go to. And that's my dream, is because I'm a big secret fat kid. Go there for Thanksgiving, go there for Christmas, have a good time. So, yeah.
Let's break some bread and have a good time.
Exactly. Yeah. And like, I live in Dallas. It doesn't rain like a month and a half now. So I like to go to a place where it's green.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's kind of my legacy that I want to create. And then if I do it right, it becomes a place where everyone can go there. It's that environment for them to be successful. Yeah, exactly. And give them the space to do it.
So other than leadership, what are a few of your values? And then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, so leadership's one of them. I actually have them written down. I was just thinking about it earlier today. So leadership's one of them. Health is another. Candidly, being vulnerable. I had 2 great concussions in high school. And so,
for football?
Yep.
Okay.
I remember one specifically, almost kind of getting knocked out, but this is before it was cool too. This is before the Will Smith movie. And that's when I learned I had one, was the next year.
Okay.
So health is a big thing for me. So I always kind of keep an eye on like what's new, what's effective, what's consistent.
What's the Will Smith movie?
I think it was Concussion. It talks about like traumatic brain injuries.
Okay.
It's just a big thing that I keep a close eye on.
Okay.
Another one's adventure. So that's kind of where that place in the mountains kind of comes up and being outside. And then also just competition and athleticism, just because I'm naturally competitive and I don't want to get super fat when I'm old because I want to be able to run when I'm old.
Yeah,
Some
yeah.
clients that did that in their 90s thought that was kind of cool. So I thought, hey, let's try to keep that. So those are kind of my general values that kind of keep consistently coming up. So that's how I look at it. And that's why my legacy plan is to get that awesome place in the mountains.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing your values.
Yeah, appreciate it. Glad I
Uh,
got to.
yeah. Is there anything else you would like to share about your vision for Woodall Wealth Management or your own legacy?
Yeah, I think for my firm, the mission's pretty clear is to provide that financial peace of mind and really be there for our families. I don't really want to call them clients. I want to call them families who I'm there with. What we're here to do. It's not, I don't like the kind of the insurance salesman point of view. We don't sell people anything. It's just, hey, have a deep connection. That's what we're here for. And that's
Yeah.
probably the biggest thing I want to share about it for sure.
Very nice, very nice. Um, Thank you, James, for speaking into what it is that you do to give other people an insight, and also the what I would call the higher level of questions that are required to make the psychology of money work so we can take the stress out of it. And I think that when there is this higher level of questions, the exploration allows people to find new answers. So their reality bubble can expand regarding possibilities and choices, and they don't have to feel like they're locked in or they're that island, like you mentioned about your female friend that left the attorney's office and was like, oh my gosh, what do I do?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I really do enjoy it. And I've certainly have subscribed and listened to all your other podcasts too. They've been great.
Okay, great. I'm going to close this out with my paragraph and
Yeah.
okay, so in closing, I'm Angelina Carleton, the hostess of the Design Your Legacy podcast, as well as the founder of Legacy Planning, a boutique coaching and advisory firm based out of Beverly Hills, California, USA, but international in those I coach. I hope to dive deep into subjects that can help a person define, develop, and execute their legacy, and continue to scour the landscape for those who can be great resources to every dimension of your legacy. For many listeners, there can never be enough education and preparation in the moat around your castle. Whether you find yourself with new wealth or generational wealth, may the content of this channel be an anchor in any storms ahead. We do our best to provide original content for your intellectual and emotional curiosity. Thank you so much for joining us today. And if you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Or if you're on Apple Podcasts, please rate and review. So thank you so much. And also thank you, James, for being such a wonderful guest this lovely afternoon.
Thank you for having me.